The grand marble halls of the county courthouse echoed with the shuffle of feet as people filed into the courtroom. Judge Raymond Caldwell sat high on the bench, his expression etched with the self-importance that had made him feared among attorneys and plaintiffs alike. He prided himself on efficiency, delivering verdicts swiftly, sometimes without even hearing the full arguments. His reputation for impatience and arrogance was well known, but today his contempt would be directed at the wrong person. The bailiff called the next case. Plaintiff, Mr. Daniel Carter versus the City Transportation Board. The clerk announced. A hush fell over the room as Daniel Carter, a former Marine and disabled veteran, struggled to rise from his wheelchair. His prosthetic leg, a crude government-issued model, barely supported his weight. Despite his pain, he adjusted his dress, blues, his medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Carter had served 2 decades in the military, surviving battles that had claimed many of his brothers in arms, yet here he was fighting another war, this time against a system that had wronged him. The City Transportation Board had denied him disability accommodations on public transit, making it nearly impossible for him to get to his job. He was suing for the right to accessible transportation, something he was legally entitled to. Judge Caldwell barely looked at him before scoffing. "You're suing the city over a bus seat," he said, shaking his head. Murmur spread through the courtroom. Some chuckled. Others looked uncomfortable. Daniel clenched his jaw. "Your Honor, I'm suing for equal access. The law requires reasonable accommodation for disabled veterans." Caldwell sighed dramatically. "Mr. Carter, I understand you served in the military. Thank you for your service, by the way. But this court has real cases to deal with. Not every inconvenience is a lawsuit." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Daniel remained composed, but his hands tightened around the armrests of his wheelchair. "With all due respect, Your Honor, my ability to move around the city is not an inconvenience. It's a right." Judge Caldwell smirked. "All right, Mr. Carter, do you expect the city to redesign its entire transit system just for you?" Another chuckle from the gallery. Daniel swallowed his anger. He had faced enemies on the battlefield, but the indifference of his own countrymen cut deeper than any wound. "I expect the law to be upheld," Daniel said evenly. "And I expect justice." Judge Caldwell leaned back, amused. "Justice? We'll see about that." But what he didn't know was that Daniel Carter wasn't just any man, and before this trial ended, the judge himself would learn a lesson he'd never forget. Daniel sat silently as his attorney, Sarah Delgado, presented at the evidence. She was young, determined, and relentless, a sharp contrast to the judge's dismissive attitude. "Your Honor," she began, her voice firm, "the Americans with Disabilities Act clearly states that public transportation must be accessible to all citizens, including disabled veterans like Mr. Carter. The city has failed to comply." Judge Caldwell waved a hand. "The city has limited resources should they take funds from schools or hospitals to accommodate a single individual." Sarah didn't flinch. "It's not about one person. It's about every veteran who has sacrificed for this country only to return home and find their basic rights ignored." Daniel watched as the judge rolled his eyes. "Miss Delgado, let's be practical. Mr. Carter, you're able-bodied enough to get..." Something inside him began to change. His body trembled slightly, and an intense heat grew in his chest. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to control what was about to be unleashed. Meanwhile, Marco and his group laughed among themselves, convinced they were in control. What they didn't know was that every insult, every push, and every humiliation was pushing them closer to the edge of something they couldn't imagine. That night, in his room, Aaron sat in front of the mirror. His eyes glowed again, this time with a deep blue light that illuminated the entire space. His skin seemed to change for a brief moment, revealing a silvery texture under the light. "I must resist," he thought to himself. "I can't let them find out who I am. Not now." However, something told him that the conflict wouldn't end there, and he was right. Marco and his group were planning something even bigger. The tension was palpable. The next day, the school hallways seemed noisier, as if something big was about to happen. Marco and his group were more confident than ever, armed with a new plan to humiliate Aaron publicly. This time they wanted to make sure everyone saw it and joined in the mockery. At the end of the day, Marco organized an incident in the gym. He convinced the coach to let the students practice freely, arguing that it was a good way to end the day. What the coach didn't know was that the group of bullies had prepared an ambush as usual. Aaron tried to keep to himself. He sat alone in the bleachers, staring off into space, waiting for things to be over soon. But Marco wasn't about to let that happen. "Hey Aaron, why don't you come play with us?" Marco shouted from the court with a mocking smile. Aaron ignored him, but that only fueled Marco's anger. "What's wrong? Are you scared? Or maybe your species doesn't know how to play, he added, prompting laughter. From his friends, Rule grabbed a basketball and threw it directly at Aaron. Although the throw was strong, Aaron caught it with surprising speed without even getting up from his seat. The entire gym fell silent. Those watching were left speechless, and Marco frowned, feeling, for the first time, that something wasn't right. So you've got reflexes. Huh, let's see what else you can do, weirdo, Marco said slowly. Approaching the group surrounded Aaron, blocking any way out. Marco, emboldened by his friend presence, grabbed another ball and threw it with all his strength directly at Aaron's face. But before the ball could reach him, something incredible happened. Aaron instinctively raised his hand, and the ball stopped in midair. Not only that, it floated as if an invisible force had caught it. A murmur of amazement filled the gym. Marco stepped back, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. What is that? He stammered. Aaron slowly lowered his hand, and the ball fell to the floor with a loud thud. But that wasn't all. Aaron's eyes began to glow, an intense blue lighting up his face with an almost supernatural radiance. His skin changed for an instant, revealing metallic flashes before returning to normal. The gym erupted in screams and murmurs. Some students ran for the door, while others pulled out their phones to record what was happening. "What are you?" Marco exclaimed. Now visibly scared, Aaron, still calm, took a step forward. His voice was steady but firm like thunder. In the middle of calm, "I'm not like you, but I'm not your enemy. I just want to live in peace." Panic grew as Rule, in a desperate act, tried to punch Aaron, but before his fist could touch him, an invisible wave of energy pushed Raoul backward, sending him crashing into one of the gym mats. Aaron looked at the group of bullies, now paralyzed with fear. "I warned you to stop now. You know the truth." With those words, he turned and left the gym, but the seed of fear and uncertainty had already been planted. And his friends, who once felt invincible, now didn't know what to do. As Aeon walked down the empty hallway, he felt a mix of relief and fear. His secret was out. There was no turning back. The school was in chaos. Rumors about what happened in the gym spread like wildfire. Videos, recorded by students, began circulating on social media, and conspiracy theories grew. Some thought Aaron was part of a secret experiment. Others believed he was a dangerous alien. But they all had one thing in common: fear. Aaron walked through the hallways, feeling the stares around him. Some students quickly moved out of his way. Others whispered softly, but no one dared to approach him. However, Marco and his group couldn't accept defeat. Marco's wounded pride was too great to let it go. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, Marco and his friends intercepted Aaron in the back parking lot of the school. Roll held a baseball bat, and the other boys carried sticks and rocks. There was